Good evening, I'm Faye Kwan. Our top stories for tonight. US Appeals Court rules that Trump's tariffs will remain for now. And US-China talks on pause with a possible call between Trump and Xi soon. That's coming up on AWANI International. The U.S. Federal Appeals Court has temporarily reinstated President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs. This comes a day after a trade court ruled that the bulk of his global tariffs were illegal. The court granted a bid from the White House to suspend the lower court's order, which found that Trump exceeded his authority by imposing the duties and ordered a block on them. It called on the plaintiffs in the case to respond by June 5th and the government by June 9th. In its appeal, the Trump administration argued that the decision had improperly second-guessed the president and risked unraveling months of trade negotiations. White House trade advisor Peter Navarro said the government would seek alternative ways to impose the tariffs if it ultimately loses in court. He added that the U.S. remained engaged in trade talks with other countries. Meanwhile, trade talks between the U.S. and China have stalled. Just 2 weeks after Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent brokered a temporary truce in the trade war. Bessent told Fox News that progress has slowed, but he expects more talks in the coming weeks, possibly even direct talks between U.S. President Donald Trump and China's Premier Xi Jinping soon. The 90-day pause on tariffs had sparked a global market rally, but momentum has faded. Since then, Washington has shifted focus to trade talks with other major trading partners. Bessent says countries like Japan are negotiating in good faith, with a delegation heading to Washington tomorrow, undeterred by the recent trade court ruling. On Wednesday, a U.S. trade court ruled that Trump exceeded his authority in imposing most of its tariffs. But within a day, a federal appeals court reinstated them, temporarily halting that ruling while the government appeals.
George. Well, Brett, it seems highly inappropriate for the judiciary to wade in here.
We'll be back with more after the break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Hamas says a US-backed plan for a ceasefire in Gaza fails to meet its core demands. However, the group says it will continue to study the proposals. The White House on Thursday said that Israel had signed off on the plan put forward by US envoy Steve Witkoff. It would reportedly see Hamas releasing 10 living hostages and handing over the bodies of 18 others in 2 phases. This would be in exchange for a 60-day ceasefire and the release of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. Israel imposed a total blockade on Gaza and resumed its military offensive against Hamas on March 18th, effectively ending a 2-month ceasefire that was brokered by Qatar, Egypt and the US. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, nearly 4,000 people have been killed in Gaza over the past 10 weeks. More than 8,000 Indian nationals have been deported from the US since January. According to India's Foreign Ministry, around 62% of them were sent back on commercial flights amid President Donald Trump's renewed crackdown on undocumented migrants.
In February, the U.S. deported over 100 Indian nationals on a military flight. Reports indicated that some of them had been sent back in shackles. The U.S. is said to have identified about 18,000 Indian nationals who allegedly entered the country illegally. Earlier this month, the U.S. Embassy in India issued a warning that overstaying in the U.S., even for those who initially entered legally, could lead to deportation or a permanent ban on entry in the country. Separately, India's Foreign Ministry said it hoped that Indian students' visa applications would continue to be assessed on merit, following updates to the Trump administration's policy. India remains the largest source of international students in the U.S., with some 330,000 people pursuing their studies there in the 2023 to 2024 academic year.
In other news, China has signed a convention to establish an international organization for mediation in Hong Kong. Beijing aims for the body to rival the International Court of Justice, bolstering the city's international credentials.
Hong Kong Chief Executive John Lee said the organization would cement the city's role as a top center to resolve international disputes. Its headquarters would be located at a former police station in the Wan Chai district and is due to open by the end of this year or early 2026. John added that its status would also be on par as the Permanent Court of Arbitration of the United Nations in The Hague. Indonesia, Pakistan, Laos, Cambodia and Serbia were among the countries that attended the signing ceremony. Representatives from 20 international bodies, including the United Nations, were also expected to join.
China has expressed readiness to cooperate with other countries on its rare earth export controls. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian says Beijing remains committed to maintaining the stability of global production and supply chains. According to Chinese state media, the country will relax restrictions for Chinese and European semiconductor firms. This follows meetings between industry players and the Ministry of Commerce, where concerns over shortages were raised. China had imposed export controls on rare earth elements and their related products in early April, requiring all exporters to apply for licenses. In response, Washington suspended some sales of critical technology to China, including components related to jet engines. The US imports the majority of its rare earths from China, which controls over 90% of global processing capacity for rare earth magnets that are vital to the defense sector, electric vehicles, and electronics. The US plans to ramp up weapons sales to Taiwan beyond levels seen during President Donald Trump's first term. The move could ease concerns about Trump's commitment to Taiwan, but would likely worsen already tense US-China relations. US officials expect the country's arms approvals over the next 4 years to surpass those during Trump's first term. They said the US is also urging Taiwan's opposition parties not to block efforts to raise defense spending to 3% of GDP. The Trump administration approved about $18.3 billion in sales to Taiwan, compared to $8.4 billion under President Biden, according to Reuters calculations. However, with the lack of formal diplomatic ties, many in Taiwan worry about Trump's commitment to the island. On his campaign trail, Trump sparked concern in Taipei by suggesting Taiwan should foot the bill for US protection and accused the island of taking away American semiconductor jobs. China has reiterated its opposition to US arms sales on Friday. France could harden its position on Israel if it continues to block humanitarian aid to Gaza. Its President Emmanuel Macron says that Paris was committed to a two-state solution to resolve the Israel-Palestinian conflict.
According to Macron, the humanitarian blockade is creating a situation that is untenable on the ground. Macron said if there is no response that meets the humanitarian situation in the coming hours and days, France may consider applying sanctions against Israeli settlers. He said this at a joint press conference with Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. Macron was speaking in Singapore on the sidelines of the Shangri-La Dialogue, Asia's premier security forum, which runs this year from May 30th to June 1st.
A report released by scientists at World Weather Attribution, Climate Central and the Red Cross Climate Centre warned that human-induced climate change has resulted in an average of 30 additional days of extreme heat for half of the global population over the past year. Published ahead of Heat Action Day, which is next Monday, the report emphasizes that the use of fossil fuels is making heat waves more frequent, stressing it was an underappreciated threat in many countries.
The report findings showed that climate change has doubled the number of extreme heat days in 195 countries compared to a world without climate change. It also recommended strategies to prepare for heat waves. This includes enhanced reporting and monitoring of heat impacts, as well as the implementation of heat wave action plans, which have previously proven to be highly effective.
There are some lessons to be learned from the European Union on the trading front. This is according to Tan Sri Tony Fernandes, who is a council member of ASEAN Business Advisory Council or ASEAN-BARC Malaysia and CEO of Capital A Berhad.
To add to Tan Sri Nazir, personally, I would like to be more like the European Union. Not on the political front, but on the trading front.
Okay.
Right? So I think the EU has been a great success, and I think the UK is now seeing that actually leaving the EU was detrimental to their economy. And so they're now trying to find ways to go back in. So from a trading and an economic bloc, the EU, as other regional economic unions, have been very successful. I think the EU probably, in terms of politics and regulations and all those things, probably is way, way ahead of, or maybe never even needed in terms of ASEAN. But in terms of creating a single trading bloc, that's very important. Going back to your question, and as I kind of touched on it as well, is we're not a single market. A foreign investor coming in has to set up 10 companies, has to deal with different regulations, and so the economy of size, which people are excited about, 700 million people, is not fully met.
Right.
The efficiencies are not fully met.
Catch the full one-hour conversation on Consider This, which also featured Tan Sri Nazir Razak, chairperson of ASEAN-BARC Malaysia, and Lim Chen Yuan, council member of ASEAN-BARC Malaysia, as well as group CEO of Yinson Holdings Berhad. Now, other than that, throughout the one-hour conversation on Consider This, we also touched on the ASEAN business entity. More specifically, what are the hindrances to the proposal?
Well, I think for a start, the beauty of this idea is that it does not require reciprocity.
It doesn't.
Yeah, so Malaysia can just go ahead
and do it.
Whether Indonesia does it or Thailand does it, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
That's how easy it is. Then if you talk about the hindrances, well, it's always going to be difficult because it involves multiple stakeholders, multiple ministries. So, for instance, movement of people would require Home Ministry. I think if you ask the Trade Ministry, they're very much in favor of this idea, but the Home Ministry will look at it, have concerns and so on. So one has to tackle all these things. But I think if if the government actually sits down and thinks about it, this is actually a very innovative yet very simple way of realizing this.
Do you see any?
Now that wraps up AWANI International for tonight. Stay tuned for our reports on the rivalries, strategies and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. And visit international.astroawani.com for more. And be sure to follow our social media accounts at Power Affairs. That's all for now. I'm Faye Kwan. Thank you for watching and good night.